Coming up on today's live Locked On Bucks, the NBA Cup schedule released for all 30 teams. So we get into the Bucks' 4 games in that NBA Cup, some similarities to last year and the overall thoughts on that tournament setup. There is one very interesting free agent target already next offseason, and rookie A.J. Johnson in the news the past couple of days. We'll share why and hear from you coming up next here on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Locked On Bucks. I am Justin Garcia here with you. Thank you to all of the everydayers for making Locked On Bucks your first listen or view every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well. All parts of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports have stopped sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. Something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We still await the full reveal of the NBA schedules Camille and I had talked about earlier in the week. I'm assuming that is coming tomorrow on Thursday, but you get the sense it's either Thursday or Friday that we're going to learn of the full schedule for the Bucks and all 30 teams in the NBA. In the meantime, we've learned what opening night is going to be. We've learned what the Bucks season opener is going to be, the third straight year that they have the Philadelphia 76ers to begin things, and the second time in the last 3 years that it will be in Philadelphia. We also learned the Christmas Day games, and the omission there is the Bucks. The first time in 7 years now that the Bucks will not be featured on that Christmas Day slate by the NBA. We shared our thoughts. Doc Rivers on the Bill Simmons podcast over the weekend shared some very similar thoughts to that as well. So those portions of the leaks have been out there. We've gotten into our thoughts on Christmas Day, on opening against Philadelphia in each of the last couple of shows. And now it's time to get into the reaction for these NBA Cup games. So we already knew who the 4 opponents would be with the NBA Cup bracket, if you will, the groups being revealed already about a month ago that the league did that. So we knew the 4 other opponents that the Bucks would be up against, and now we finally get to put pen to paper and see who are the home games, who are the road games, and when are these going to take place. So the 2 home games are going to be the first 2 games that the Bucks play in this NBA Cup, and that is starting things November 12th at Fiserv Forum against the Toronto Raptors. Should also point out this. 2 of these games are going to be nationally televised games. 2 are not. The Toronto Raptors game is one that is not. You have the Bucks and the Indiana Pacers. That is going to be an ESPN game 10 days later. So, again, the Tuesday, Friday format here within the NBA Cup days. Friday, November 22nd, the Bucks at Fiserv Forum against the Indiana Pacers, and something we've already touched on throughout the offseason and obviously all throughout the second half of last season, that rivalry that's developing. Last 2 games are the road games for the Bucks, and once again, the penultimate NBA Cup game for the Bucks is on the road in Miami. The Bucks and the Heat on November 26th, the week of Thanksgiving. And then the following week, as it's the final night of group play, it's the Bucks and the Detroit Pistons. Now, we've already started to see the takes being put out there of, man, who has the easiest path to winning this thing, or at least to getting to Vegas and being a part of those semifinals. On paper, doesn't appear to be an overly difficult group that the Bucks have. The Pistons are going to be better than they were a season ago, but still, in all likelihood, they're not sniffing the playoffs. The Raptors are probably in that same group as well on the outside looking into the playoff picture. Pacers, there's no reason to believe they won't be just as good as they were a season ago, if not even better, with some improved play from young players. Benedict Mathurin, remember, wasn't there for the back half of the season a year ago. So a lot more reason for optimism in Indiana. And Miami remains interesting in the same spot they've been what seems like each of the last few off seasons. It obviously hinges on health, what version of Jimmy Butler that you get, how many games you're getting Jimmy Butler as well for the Miami Heat, progression as well from some of their young players, notably Tyler Hero, and what version of him are you going to see? We've seen some of that progression from Bam Adebayo late last season and certainly carrying into the Olympics when we saw him adding things like a three-point shot to his game. So they're in that similar spot where every year we don't really know what to think about the Miami Heat. I think on paper, the team that has the easiest draw to reaching those semifinals, you would have to say, is the Boston Celtics. Really, Cleveland Cavaliers are the only team in that group that is expecting to be a playoff type of team. So it's easy to look at Boston and say, hey, this is the team that has the easiest path, but I don't think it's overly difficult for the Bucks. I mentioned that group that the Celtics are in. So this is the Bucks group. As you're watching on YouTube, you can see the home games and those other four teams that are in the grouping there for the Bucks. The other ones that I mentioned of who has the easiest path. Well, we mentioned the Celtics. They're in Group C. That group is the Atlanta Hawks, who may be where they've been the last couple of years, and that's really a play-in tournament caliber team. The Washington Wizards, we don't expect to be in the playoffs. The Chicago Bulls, who again are doing everything in their power, it seems, to avoid the playoffs this season. And then the Cleveland Cavaliers is that only team in there, dare I say good, but you would say a playoff caliber team. Group A in the Eastern Conference is not by any means a juggernaut, but that certainly seems like that's the toughest one. It's really top heavy with the Knicks, the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Orlando Magic as those three teams that are likely playoff teams. Brooklyn Nets, very similar to what we said about the Chicago Bulls. They're looking to avoid the playoffs. And then you have an interesting Charlotte Hornets team. So that is the East layout. As we saw last year as well, it does seem like those groups of death or the group of death would have to lie in the Western Conference. When you look at some of these squads up and down these groups, Group B, the Thunder, the Suns, the Lakers. Victor Wembanyama had a couple of showcase games in the NBA Cup last season. He and the Spurs are there. The Utah Jazz probably going to take a step backward. And then there's Group C. Those are the two most difficult groups, it would seem on paper. Group B, and nothing is touching Group C in the West, with the Denver Nuggets, the Dallas Mavericks, the New Orleans Pelicans, the Golden State Warriors, and the Memphis Grizzlies. All five of those teams expect to be playoff teams and have some heightened expectations. So some similarities to this draw that the Bucks had a season ago, and especially with that schedule. But we finally got to see what's the order of these games and to where are they going to be played. So we know 5 games for the Bucks this upcoming season. Now we just wait on the other 77 of those. Speaking of this upcoming season, if we go even further than that and look into the offseason, there was already one very interesting potential free agent target that is out there, not just for the Bucks, but all teams. We'll get into that conversation coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you about our friends over at FanDuel. We all love sports so much that we never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have wound down, we're simply getting fewer games, and the sports just aren't sporting like we want them to. But FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to fanduel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So I mentioned there's already one very, very intriguing free agency candidate for next summer, and we really saw this player start to take off during the Olympics. I think even Bucks fans were probably watching, especially that Team USA versus France game for the gold medal, and saying, this guy would look pretty good in a Bucks uniform. And that player that we're talking about is Gershon Yabusele. So recall, he does have some NBA experience. He was a Danny Ainge draft pick just outside of the lottery in 2016 for the Boston Celtics. Played just 2 years in the NBA, the 17-18 season and the 18-19 season. It was by no means a success for Gershon Yabusele. Averaged just over 2 points per game in each of those 2 seasons. That was his career average as well. Was not a particularly efficient player, not a good shooter, ran into foul trouble quite a bit. But frankly, it was conditioning and his size that was the issue with Gershon Yabusele. So fast forward to the Olympics when Victor Wembanyama grabbed the attention, rightfully so. Gershon Yabusele was, if not the best, one of the best players on that silver medal France team. And especially once you got into the knockout rounds, it really stood out watching Yabusele to see, look, what this guy does. It wasn't there, 6-7 years ago when he was drafted, still very young and coming over to America. It wasn't there then. But what he does, what he brings, it's there now. A power forward, worked on the shot. You saw improved shooting from Yabusele there in the Olympics. And frankly, we've seen it in international play for the last couple of seasons. But his size, 6'8", still built very big, listed at 260, but not quite as, and I want to be as kind as I can here, out of shape, at least on the appearance, as it was when he was playing here in the NBA. So the thought is, look, this is what we're talking about. When you hear me salivate over players like Chris Livingston, this is what you're looking for, that big size that can take on fours and can match up and show switching ability. And look, I suppose we should start with this part. There's a lot to like about what you saw in this stretch of international play. It's still a small sample. It's not to take away from what Yabusele brings. I think he's still a very intriguing target, but the Bucks, you would assume, are not going to be alone, if in fact they are interested in him. But you don't want to make too much over Olympic play and say, see, this guy's doing it. He can do this at the NBA level and it's going to translate. Maybe that's the case. But think about all the other names that we've said that with. Georgios Papagiannis, Giannis's teammate on Team Greece. We saw a lot of, just get rid of Brook Lopez and bring in Papagiannis. Look what he's able to do. You're not going to make that type of change. So I think what we saw in the Olympics, he is certainly worthy of a flyer. He is still playing internationally. He's still under contract, but has expressed a desire to return to the NBA. And when you look at those international prospects, I think he's clearly the guy that stood out the most during the Olympics, knowing that he was a former first-round draft pick, did play in the NBA, went away, worked on his game, and you saw those things you were hoping to see. He was always big, and you were hoping, okay, he's going to be that stout defender you can't get past in the post. But that's not where the game is anymore. You need more flexibility, mobility, switchability, and that is something he has clearly worked on and brought to his game here. So he has expressed that interest. He wants to return to the NBA. Posted on his own social media account, he wants another opportunity to prove himself, saying, I've been waiting for a second chance, and I'm ready. That was the tweet from Yabusele earlier here in this summer. He has 1 year left on his contract with Real Madrid and an NBA buyout of about $2.5 million. It was just $1 million prior to the Olympics beginning, which, look, if you were over there scouting him heavily, Maybe you saw enough there and said, okay, we'll pay that $1 million buyout. It's now gone up to 2.5. But nonetheless, you get the sense with what he's saying, with what he showed in the Olympics, and frankly, $2.5 million for a buyout is not this immovable object. You get the sense that next summer, Gershon Yabusele is going to be in the NBA once again. We don't know if the Bucks are interested. I know we put that in there. I would assume most teams are going to be interested in him. 20 points in that gold medal game against Team USA. Had some nice defensive plays, a couple of steals as well. He averaged 14 points per game during the tournament. And I mentioned, look, Victor Wembanyama is the most talented player on that Team France. He got a lot of the attention, and he was good in the Olympics. Gershon Yabusele deserved, I think, to be on that first team for Olympics. Made second team, all honors. So a very intriguing prospect. And as we mentioned, we'll see. I'm assuming a lot of teams are going to be jumping after Gershon Yabusele next offseason. Will the Bucks be one of those teams? Because as we've talked about, this summer, next summer, I should say, is shaping up to be an interesting one for the Bucks, because we were kind of in that same spot last year where if there was a, not necessarily blow it up, but let's just make wholesale changes, last year was setting you up for that opportunity with the Chris Middleton free agency, with Brook Lopez, who, according to reports, was very, very close to bolting and leaving Milwaukee for the Houston Rockets. Those were your, I don't even want to say get out of jail cards, because of the insinuation of what that means of the play of those players. And also, look, just because it shaves off that money from your cap, it doesn't plummet the Bucks all the way beneath the cap and give you the opportunity to sign other guys. You're moving closer to that this upcoming summer, as you know, Camille and I have discussed at length. Some of those contracts that are either going to be coming off of the books altogether, those same two names, once again, in Brook Lopez and Chris Middleton. But beyond that, you could save money other ways, right? It's not just the absence of those players, as much as some Bucks fans don't want to hear it. If you do extend Chris Middleton, if you do even extend Brook Lopez, which on the surface may seem crazy for a 36-year-old, but depending on the contract that you get, and just the sheer fact that thinking about life after Brook Lopez, who's on the roster right now that would replace Brook Lopez as your center? You can say Giannis, fine, but that requires you to have a power forward that isn't Bobby Portis. And again, I don't mean that as a knock on Bobby Portis. You need depth, and you just need something else. Switchability and more versatility if that's who you're playing next to Giannis. And not only that, somebody, and I hate to keep going back to the name, but PJ Tucker-esque, that could do some other things, that can shoot, that can defend multiple positions to free up Giannis even more. It just doesn't exist. So as much as you want to dismiss it and say, well, 36 years old, you don't want to extend this guy. No, you don't want to extend him for big money. But if Brook Lopez is willing to take a more team-friendly deal and just get more years and extend his career that way, I would certainly be open to it, assuming what we see from Brook Lopez this season isn't too far off from what we've seen each of the 6 seasons that he spent here in Milwaukee. 7 seasons now that he spent in Milwaukee. So that's the big piece. Chris Middleton as well. I think he'd be more amenable to that, and that would make more sense as well with his age, 3 years younger than Brook Lopez. But that is one way to save some money as well. And as we mentioned, look, it's not disastrous by any means. It does start to get better. There are still possibilities, the cap that is that I'm talking about, there are still possibilities for the Bucks to get under that second apron if they do make some type of cap-saving move where you trade a player for a draft pick, something like that, at the deadline or during the season. I believe they need to shave about $3 million, $3 to $4 million to get beneath that second apron. So there's ways to do that. And with those contracts and the potential flexibility that you're getting, you are opening up some opportunities here to start to get to a comfortable spot in that salary cap, because next season, as of this moment, the Bucks have $182 million, just under $183 million, that are locked up and basically guaranteed to players on the books for next season is what we're looking for here. The second apron level next season is $207 million. And that 183, that's for 11 players. So 3 other guys that you would have to acquire then to fill out the roster at your minimum of 14 and have about $24 million to do that with. That opens up some things that you could use, like a taxpayer mid-level exception. So there are other avenues to get after a player like Gershon Yabusele or other players next season in free agency for the Bucks. Speaking of players in next season that we're keeping our eye on, one of them just got the lowdown, a scouting report that was done on him and put in some work with a soon-to-be enemy of the Bucks. We'll get into that conversation coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. And thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There is no offseason in the NBA, and the Locked On NBA podcast provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm going to be on that Locked On NBA podcast tomorrow to give some thoughts and the season preview, if you will, for this Bucks team. One guy, when we talk about season previews, that is going to be very interesting to keep an eye on this upcoming season is rookie AJ Johnson. And when you go back to the draft, I think the Bucks selection of a very, very young player who you looked at the frame and you looked at some of the numbers that he posted in Australia and you thought, this is what we did with the pick. Not using that as a sweetener to move a contract to get onto the second apron. This is what we did with it. Now bringing a player that theoretically is going to be able to jump in and contribute from day one. The Bucks took AJ Johnson, and I don't know about unanimously, but overwhelmingly, I would say it was met with resistance by a lot of Bucks fans. Skepticism, if not resistance. Then you got to watch him in Summer League. And, just as we had mentioned, you don't want to make too much out of the Olympics. You don't want to make too much out of Summer League, right? We get that. But what you saw and how you saw it, I think, is what stood out. There were downs. It wasn't just a stock up for AJ Johnson, but I think you saw a lot of flashes and glimpses that led you to believe there is something here. And maybe it's not the ideal timeline in terms of, hey, you got this year with this group for sure, but the overall window with Giannis and Dame, it may be 2 years, it may be 3 years, who knows? It could be more. It doesn't seem to line up with that duo and certainly with the full group, with Brook Lopez and Chris Middleton. But we've seen more and more people dig into scouting AJ Johnson and some of the flashes that you saw. Able to use both hands. Look, the big thing was he's going to need to add some bulk to his frame. And the most recent scouting that we talked about here for AJ came just the other day. The No Ceilings account that you can follow on social and on YouTube. He just did a breakdown of AJ Johnson's play in Summer League. And the gist of it, the roughly 35 to 40-minute breakdown that he did, was what we just walked through. I don't expect him to contribute this season, but I'm cautiously optimistic based off of what I saw here. His ability to take on contact, even knowing the frame isn't quite there yet. The flashes of athleticism, the speed, the ability to use both the right and left hand, just the fearlessness that he brought. But the one thing that was pointed out the most is, look, it's not just the offense. We know he needs to add to the frame, put on some weight, be able to withstand some of that wear and tear and the rigors of the NBA game, especially if your game is going to be not just shooting, but drive and kick or drive and finish at the rim. You saw some of that in the Summer League tilt. And that's what stood out the most, along with the defensive willingness, right? That's what we've talked about for years, is finding two-way players for the Bucks and guys that can fit a certain mold, giving you switchable size. At 6'4", he's got pretty good size for a point guard, good wingspan and length as well. It's just the frame. but we saw enough of this to really get, dare I say, excited about what we're seeing from A.J. Johnson. And that was the overall takeaway here as well from No Ceilings was, yeah, I don't expect this guy to be an all rookie or really seeing much floor time this upcoming season. But I do think where the Bucs drafted him at 24, those tools that he brings, and keep in mind too, pretty highly touted prep. If he would have stayed at Texas, that was one of the other takeaways as well. He's probably a lottery pick and maybe even a top 10 pick. So there's a lot to like here. You don't want to make the comp to Giannis, and the Bucs basically saying in that draft, look, he may be unknown, but there's a lot of intrigue here. Let's buy a lottery ticket on him and see if it pays off. That's kind of what you're doing with A.J. Johnson here as well. Not expecting him to become a two-time MVP and face of the franchise like Giannis, but there's a lot of upside if he can continue to grow his game. So it's not just Bucs fans that left Summer League very, very positive and feeling good about A.J. Johnson. It's more and more that we're seeing as well from scouts and other people digging into Summer League and everything in terms of film study and more. And A.J. Johnson, not to stop there, has been very busy this offseason as he has been working out with Paul George and working on specific aspects of his game. We saw Paul George basically giving that away in a video post just last week of he in the gym working out with some other players. A.J. Johnson was one of those. So these are the things you like to see there from the young guys continuing to put in that work and especially learning from other players, watching the same drills that A.J. Johnson is doing and Paul George doing as well. There's a lot of reasons to get excited. Again, not this year, but for the future from A.J. Johnson. That'll about do it for today's show. Leave your thoughts in the comments as well for what you think about this NBA Cup schedule that the Bucs have. Do they have one of the easiest paths in the Eastern Conference when you look at that grouping, given what we don't know about the Miami Heat? You know, the Pacers are going to be good. The rest of it, not really certain there. So your thoughts on this NBA Cup schedule. And as I mentioned, it's any day now. It could be later this afternoon. It could be tomorrow, but I do really believe it's going to be this week that we learn the full NBA schedule. Once that comes out, Camille and I will share our thoughts on that. We will talk to you once again tomorrow, either previewing or reacting to a full NBA schedule release. But that will do it for today's show. Talk to you once again tomorrow here on Locked On Bucs.